I'd like to welcome up to the stage for our next panel on EV station repair, maintenance, and communications, Dan Lakey, SVP of Business Development for Fortress Solutions.
Thank you, Alex. I think everybody can hear me. Sounds like you can. I can hear myself pretty well. So I guess the way we'll kick this off is I'll introduce myself, then we'll bring up our panelists. So I'm Dan Lakey. I'm from Fortress Solutions. If you haven't heard of Fortress Solutions, or it kind of sounds like a name maybe you heard of because our name's on your lanyard. So still hard to hear? Okay, I'll get closer to the mic. So yeah, Fortress Solutions, we're on your lanyard. So if you're wondering who that is, that's us. So what we're talking about today, realities of EV station repair, maintenance, construction. I think the key word there is realities. So what the panel here is going to try to talk about is how do we deal with maintenance, uptime, reliability, availability with our current realities. So with that, let me introduce the panel. Antoine, come on up. Carl, Jen, and finally Camille. All right, good looking panel. So let me introduce myself and what we do, and then we'll do the same with the crew. So Fortress Solutions is a 30-year company, but we really focus for the first 25 of that in the telecom space. I know you've been hearing a lot of the similarities between telecom and trying to achieve 5 nines reliability and EV, trying to get to that point. So we took some of those technologies, those people, those infrastructures, those practices, software, and we're bringing that to new industries. And I think that's going to be critical here. So what Fortress does is we kind of sit behind the scenes, behind a lot of these suppliers and others supporting the infrastructure. So kind of up front, we're supporting OEMs, systems integrators, owners and operators on getting their equipment maybe overseas with import-export. We also do a lot of forward logistics, staging, kitting, making sure the distribution channel is there to get your equipment to your customer site when it needs to be there. Then we kind of disappear for a while, and we come back on the maintenance side, which is what we're going to talk about today. And that's really about using our forward stocking locations that we've deployed all over the world and certainly all over North America to provide critical spares. So your customers that have expectations of 90-something% availability have spares when they need it in the field services hands, whether it be next business day, 24 hours, 4 hours, immediate. So we do that. We also support the owner-operators in a managed services part of the EV charging. So we have a NOC center, so we can monitor equipment, environmentals, uptime. We can answer the phone when the 800 number is called because a charger doesn't work. We have remote technical support in cooperation with the OEMs, so we can provide remote technical support for the owner-operators so they don't have to do that themselves. So that's us. So let me introduce the panel again and let them introduce themselves. So Camille?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Camille. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Charger Help. And what we're really interested in is this idea that there's so much data and information that's coming off of these charging stations, as well as the cars and the payment systems. And oftentimes, folks don't necessarily know what the problem actually is, whose fault is it, where is the problem starting at, and even when the NOCs are looking at this information, oftentimes they still have to dispatch someone out in order to be the eyes and the ears. And so what we're doing with those service companies, we have built out a mobile app and platform to gather that data set. So that way the NOCs can actually be able to make more informed decisions. And what we've been able to see is that we are able to build out models to actually start solving some of these issues further upstream in order to better impact the uptime of the charging infrastructure. So super excited to chat with y'all today. I know a lot of things about data and a lot of things about workforce development, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Camille. Jen?
Hi, my name is Jen Fiegel. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success for Electrada. Electrada, what we do is provide a 360-degree electric fuel solution. So what we do is design, own, operate, and manage that solution for our fleet customers. That really starts with what we've really looked at as an organization is how to bring in anchors of all the core expertise needed to be able to effectively electrify a fleet. And being able to do that and starting a journey with our customers, identifying what their use cases are, how to optimize that use case, what are their success metrics, what's the experience they need to be able to go through to be able to continue to expand overall and have a reliable solution with a 99% uptime at a fixed electrical fuel rate.
Thank you, Jen. Carl.
Hi, excited to be here. My name is Carl Kaslik, CEO of WattLogic, and what we focus on as a company is being a turnkey operator of EV charging stations, both in the commercial sector as well as even in the residential sector. And one of the biggest needs that we saw in the space was educating the contractor community. And there are many contractors out there that want to be involved, but don't necessarily know how to be involved. We've met many of them here today and yesterday, for example. And so what we did is built a software that integrates around 700 contractors to date across the United States and helps employ the tools and intake forms that they need to bring EV to their existing customers as a value add, and then also work with our solutions as well. And part of the exciting part in that is that you also have a network there that's for reliability as well. You have a distributed network of independent contractors that have the ability to step in and help maintain these chargers that we're talking about across the country and the need that we have. So I'm excited to dig in today, and I agree with Camille on data and the importance of using artificial intelligence in this space to predict data and be ahead of failures before they happen and someone pulls up to the charger and it doesn't work.
Thank you, Carl. Lastly, Antoine.
Antoine Thompson, Executive Director of the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalition. We cover D.C., our nation's capital, Northern Virginia, and good parts of Maryland as well. We run a number of electrification programs. One of our big programs is the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Project, where we're deploying 12 DC fast charging hubs in DC. We're also deploying 375 level 2 chargers between DC, Maryland, and West Virginia. We also do a multi-family charging program, some workforce development efforts, and we run an electric school bus program. And we've had the time of our life dealing with chargers that don't work.
Excellent. So before I continue kind of with the questions for the panelists, how's the volume from the panelists? Are they okay? So you guys in the back? A little higher? Okay, so if we could scream a little bit into there, if we can. Thank you. So I thought I'd start really high. Like, what's the target? So we've heard from the Biden administration they're looking for 97% uptime. I'm not, uptime, does that mean, is it pingable? Does that mean it's up? We're actually able to charge it? Is availability maybe a better metric that we're going to use? Because really it's about the experience of the user. And what is their experience? Are they seeing 97%? Are they seeing something less? So let's start, and really for all the panelists, and maybe we'll start in opposite and come back from Antoine, but if we're trying to impact availability of chargers with the end goal of increasing adoption of EV, what is our target?
So I would say our read on this is that really only applies to federally funded chargers, right? So the feds really still have left us like a half-baked loaf of bread. And so we need some policy on non-federally funded chargers. The second thing is, what's really frustrating, I remember last year we were at the US DOT had an event on EV charging. They had a summit, and one of our board members, who's been Luis McDonald, he was at the event, left that event with his EV, and went to 4 locations in DC, and it took him 4 different locations to find a charger that worked, and he went into what we call range anxiety. So we got a lot of work, and so that's my 2 cents on it.
Okay. Carl?
Yeah, I think, obviously as a consumer or as a business, you expect that reliability. And I think one of the challenges faced right now as well is many drivers are relying on a mobile app or an interface in their car to determine what chargers are in front of them. And the expectation is that when I put that address in, I show up, the charger is easy to find, and it's something that I can reliably use. And unfortunately, that's not the experience. And I think that's the frustration that many end users have, is there's not a correlation with what appears on a map and what appears as an available charger. And I think that's where Tesla has been so successful, is with a vertically integrated system that they have insight into their chargers, and you can see in your Tesla dashboard, there's 7 of 16 chargers available. Here's the charging speed. And when you pull up, you know what you expect. And I think as an industry, that's where interoperability across charging networks and hardware providers is really, really important. And I think transparency of data, particularly from the hardware, being reported up to those systems so that it's that availability and that uptime is accurate. Because as you said, Dan, like the idea of uptime being that there's power to the unit isn't useful to someone at the end of the day. It needs to know availability means that there's not a sign hanging on it saying, unoperable, not in use, or a communication down, or whatever the case is. And so we need to have reliable data and reliable interchange. There's 73 different software operators right now in the United States. How are those 73 different software platforms talking together and agreeing on a standard that shows what true availability is? And I think that's the start of it. And there's a hardware problem too, which I think we'll get to in a later question. But I think it starts with just that, from the end consumer, the transparency of what's actually working.
Jen, I know your passion is fleet, so I suspect the expected availability in fleet, hello, Reen, is a little bit different.
It is a little bit different, but let me translate over to what Anton and Carl have shared, because every fleet customer is still have their own personal experience or things that they've heard, and they come to the table that way. So one of the things that we do that we think and very focused on fleet, one is the reliability. We do believe reliability is a must-have, not a nice-to-have, for EV adoption and for every one of our customers. So a lot of our customers have come from a personal experience on public charging that's not been very positive, or they're an organization that have kind of had a negative experience. They've already tried to do a little bit around electrification, and it hasn't been a positive experience. So number one, what we try to do is perception is reality, right? So starting with our customers, understanding, listening, and learning what is that perception, what is their reality of where they've been, the experience they have, what they might have read about as well, because we know there's a lot of energy around information out there, and start to understand that first. The second piece of that is really understanding their use cases, and the next piece about the quality of that experience is defining their success metrics. At the end of the day, what does good look like for that fleet customer? And that's not just the driver or just the fleet manager, it's also the corporate. So looking across the whole board and really understanding those and starting to understand how do they operate every day. So for us, what we are doing is try to come in and provide an electric fuel solution so our customers can still do their business the same way. It's a completely seamless. And so driving that reliability, understanding what they do, how they do it, are really key aspects of how to engage with them. But the reality of public charging is there. And maybe there's some groundwork that with reliability at a 99% uptime starts to filter towards the public sector as well.
Camille?
I like to tell folks I'm a woman of nuance and transparency. And so I actually want to offer you 3 examples that we've seen out in the field. So the first example is we had a technician call in because a driver had reported that the station didn't work. And oftentimes drivers literally just put the station don't work. Like that's what you get. And so we collect data around the car OEM. And so that was in New York. Then a little bit later, we got another report of a similar car, but in another state. And then we kept tracking it. It was so interesting. There was one specific car OEM that wasn't working on one specific hardware manufacturer. And what we found out was that the car OEM had actually recently pushed a firmware update that prevented that car from working on that specific hardware manufacturer. So the charging stations and the cars have to communicate. They all speak different languages. And so if you push a firmware that maybe you didn't let other folks know about, that charging station no longer understands that car, and it will not emit electricity. So in that case, whose fault is that, and how do you, is the station actually down? So then the other example, we actually had a customer of ours where, and so you mentioned 73, charge point operators. There's actually like 4 core software and a lot of folks who white label other people's software, or they take core software and put specialty software on top of it. But what we find when that happens is that the error codes don't actually align. And so what we'll see is that the core software says that the station is online and operable, but then the actual software that's on top of it says that the station is offline. So in that instance, whose fault is it, and is the station actually online? My last example is the one that I think that we don't talk too much about. A lot of this infrastructure prior to the NEVI funding was actually given to small businesses, right? Folks who got funding from their utilities through make-ready programs. And technically, right, they are responsible for the hardware. Oftentimes, we will get a work order from our charge point operator to go on site. We give that site host a phone call. One, no one answers the phone. That's a really big one. The next one, they actually don't know where the breaker panel is in order to shut off the station. Or 3, they just don't want us to go out and service the station because they don't have funding. Whose fault is it? Is the station actually responsible by the charge point operator? And then the last example, which I think we're going to see more and more, we have one of our customers that is a utility owner operator. 3 months ago, we went and swapped out 15 connectors because they've been cut. Literally last week, those same connectors got cut again. Who's responsible, right, and whose fault is it? So I think that as we talk about higher uptimes, I think we do have to take a step back and start identifying what are the metrics per each person. This industry is very complex. There are a lot of stakeholders. We should have measurements, but we cannot put a blanket measurement and not truly identify who's responsible. And for somebody that has, an O&M product, who is going to pay me? Because I'll go out and fix things all day, but those are the nuances within this space. So just happy to offer a perspective there. And that's all through the data that we've been able to collect from in the field.
So I think what I'm hearing is we're somewhere between 5.9's reliability and 9.5's reliability. And if I look at it's math. We're probably in the middle at about 7.7's or so. So that's the target. We're trying to get somewhere in the 9's over time. And you addressed this a bit already. What are some of the challenges that are keeping us from getting there? Camille, I think you already addressed that, so maybe we'll move on to Jen. And feel free to come back. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the last thing with the NEVI funding, and to Antoine's point, right, this is just for that federal funding, O&M costs can now be included in that funding, but a lot of states with other programs don't typically include O&M costs. So you have a small business owner that got an asset for free that isn't budgeting labor, right? Because oftentimes the issue cannot easily be identified as a parts issue, and so their warranty that they thought they have actually does not apply. So there's a lot of opportunity of how we think about, keeping these assets going, and how do we provide funding allocations for these small business owners who are now fueling operators, right? And so I just think that that's something that I think that we really need to think more deeply about. Thanks, Dan.
Jen?
Yeah, just to add on, I think it's really an add of everything we've been talking about. So one is the evolving tech, right? Right, wrong, and different. The tech is evolving, and there's different streams of it, from the hardware to the software to the firmware, even the platforms, and how do you glue it all together? That is a challenge. In our world, it's a challenge to bring that whole ecosystem together and be able to manage it and monitor it effectively to meet an uptime. And that's going to continue growing, right? Tech's going to keep changing from the vehicle to the EVSC to the platform capabilities. And I think Camilla touched on a bunch of things. There's so many platforms, there's so many components, there's so many nuances to it. That technically is a difficult part. I think the other piece, and maybe just to pair off what you're saying, the benchmarking. So where's the data? Where's the benchmark, the runway of information? So one of the things that we get asked a lot, and I got asked 4 times this week by customers, was that range anxiety is very scary to them. So we don't have benchmarking on, the first thing they'll say, one of the drivers looked at me and they're like, well, that's great, that truck's been tested. Has been tested in the real world. Has it been tested with 110-degree weather, fully loaded, going up a hill, down a hill, or stuck in California traffic, right? They're really concerned. And so that data is evolving, and so it's hard to know those elements overall. But also the experience on the equipment side. What are the failure modes? What should be expected? How do you resolve those items? So I think those are some of the main challenges to start getting a runway and have a successful path for EV adoption overall.
Yeah, great. I agree with both kind of what's said before, but I think one additional thing to keep in mind is that as we talk about hardware and solutions that are out there, you just touched on it, but things are evolving rapidly. And I think even just if you look at the manufacturers that have been in the game for a while, you've seen dramatic changes in the design of their hardware. But you've also seen on the lower end of that, you've seen a lot of new entrants into the market space that are putting out hardware that may not be tried, true, and tested, and it may not have the same heat capability. And I come from Phoenix, Arizona, for example. Not much survives the summer in Phoenix, Arizona, and me included. But as part of that, you need to have hardware that's been tested over time and at high usage, because one of the problems this industry faces is that there hasn't been super high use of this equipment that's been out there until lately. And so now you're putting more charging sessions, higher percentage of use time on this equipment. You start to learn things. And so I'm excited that I've seen some of those changes hit the market. And I've seen new entrants even into the marketplace that I think have thought through this a little more thoroughly. And you can see it in their hardware designs. And you can see it in, there's a higher, and the NEVI funding is helping this too, because they know they're gonna be held to a higher standard on the federal dollar side. And so we see design changes happening. And so I would encourage end consumers or any of you in the space to evaluate the choices that you're making. And in this case, cheaper isn't always better. And I think particularly what Camille said on the small business side, I think naturally that's the way many small businesses lean. Or multifamily, operators, they look at it and they go, well, I can get this for $600. Why would I pay $1,000? And the same goes for installation. And so I think as a market, we need to educate. And I think that's the biggest piece that's missing here. And I'm glad all of you are here, and now it's your job to spread that. But I think the education is severely missed. And we have a job as an industry to really bring that education front and center.
I would offer a couple additional things. One is that the reliability is very important. I work in the city, I live in the suburbs, and I think about this all the time because I have to go to a cold climate, which is a place called Buffalo, New York, where I'm from, at least twice a month. And so weather is an issue. But I think the other big issue is about we got to have more incentives beyond NEVI. NEVI is not a panacea, everybody. It's a down payment. Would y'all agree with that?
Yep.
It's a down payment, right? And we've got to get local governments and state governments to do more to accelerate electrification. We need more incentives beyond NEVI. I would also say that one of the things that really drives me crazy, keeps us up at night, is making sure that not only that the contractors know about it, that hopefully we're going to get into some workforce challenges, but the predictability, I think, is essential. In D.C. right now, there's a lot of carjackings going on. And you hear more and more stories about people who don't support, as was stated earlier, don't support EVs, are cutting cords. You have people carjacking people for cars. I am mortified of my wife leaving the house. We could charge at home, right? But when she does have to go into the office, it's an hour and 20-minute drive each way, right? So we've got to deal with that. And I think we need to push more innovation to make the chargers faster, right? And to make the batteries better and make sure that the equipment is of even better quality. I think all three of those things are, plus the more incentives, I think are going to be really important.
Thank you. So one of the things I said at the outset is the first word in our session is realities. So we can hope for better standards. We can hope for better support from the software and hardware OEMs. We can hope from help from the government, but we all have to manage and operate networks today. So in this next phase, I'd like to talk to the panelists about what kind of best practices, what capabilities, what technologies do we have at our disposal today that the audience should be using to try to get up to 97% uptime or better. So maybe I'll start with, let me start with Jen, because I know you think about this stuff every day.
I do. So one of the things I'm known to talk about a lot with internally as well with potential partners or partners you work with is 99% is our beacon. Everything I ask you about has got that lens on it. But just to kind of touch on, we see what I say 4 pillars for a best-in-class is what we're doing. One of them is that reliability. And it's not just the I believe when we turn it on, I believe it's going to hit 99. We start from day one, square one at design. When we're doing the solution design, we need to have that purposed reliability culture through every step. So when we design it and we work with our teams to design and what that needs to look like for an optimized solution all the way through commissioning, we're very purposeful and we do additional testing end to end because as we've touched on, there's a multitude of variables across that complex solution to double, triple check that we have a reliable solution before that vehicle comes on site and it's working. So we thread that all the way through, and so when we get to day one, that is all embedded and ingrained in what we're doing. Another pillar is our partner ecosystem, right? So there's a lot of partnership around, there's a lot of capabilities. That 360-degree solution takes a lot of partnership, and the ecosystem and how we select partners is very important to that reliability as well, and being able to bring that forward. So we work very closely to identify tech partners, contractors, O&M partners, to really be able to feed into that reliability. The next one is what I call the customer heartbeat. Understanding your customer is a pillar of how you operate. What are they looking for? What do they need to experience? How do they work every day? What are the intricacies of what that is? Being able to anticipate ahead of time and plan with them during onboarding processes of what it needs to look like day one. So do those planning steps, those intentional. Sometimes they might be even a conversation that, hey, we need to make a few tweaks here to be able to effectively and seamlessly and successfully move to electric vehicles for your operations. And the last one is resiliency, right? So the best laid plan. Something is gonna go wrong. It's how we deal with it. So we're building in tools. How do we react to it? What's our response time? In 99% land, everything's in minutes. You don't have hours, you don't have days. So we're thinking about that and mapping out that 24-hour clock. What does our day need to look like? How do we respond to it? If this happens now, what there? But we also recognize we don't know what we don't know yet. So we're gonna learn a lot, and we have to be resilient with it and how we respond to it, how we adapt, how we pivot, and be very agile in our framework and even our processes to do that.
Thanks, Jen. So a little bit of a wild card here, so I'll open up to the panel, see who wants to answer this one. So the other part of keeping these things up and running is the technology you can use to monitor, maintain, ensure uptime. Can one of the panelists or multiple panelists talk about what is some of the technology maybe the audience isn't aware of that they should be considering? Who wants that one?
I was like, that's what we're doing at Charger Hope. I don't know who else is doing that. So what we're really focused on Charger Hope is being able to, at least within the NEVI standards, taking that formula and actually allowing folks to produce what that uptime metric actually is, because a lot of it does come from like your field service work. And being able to calculate how long it's been taking to get on site, get the part, what is the true cost of it, how many work orders do you have? And so that was the whole point of our platform. But I do want to add just 3 things for your previous question.
Sure.
Just things that a lot of folks can do today is when you look at your MSAs, ensuring that you have service level agreements from the hardware and also from the network provider. So if you're getting it through a reseller, ask the reseller what is the service level agreement for parts on site for the hardware, and then also what is the service level agreement from the network provider to help troubleshoot. The other thing is stockpiling parts. One of the neat things that we've been able to do through our platform is identify through DC fast chargers what are like the top 5 parts that breaks, right? We work with a lot of the hardware manufacturers today, so this should be data that they do have through working with us. So asking them that. And then the last part is really understanding telecom, which Dan can probably tell you a ton about, right? Like some hardware only works on Verizon cell signal. So if you live in an area that doesn't have Verizon and you didn't hardwire the station probably isn't going to be reliable, right? And so I think those 3 things are just tangible things that you can do today, that can be helpful.
Right, that's great. I saw a lot of heads nodding out there, so thanks for that, Camille. Oh, go ahead, Antoine.
I just wanted to add that one of the biggest things that we need to do related to that is helping public and private sector entities know how to negotiate a contract. I think for the growth of the industry, that's going to be tremendously important. There are a lot of communities that have had some good and bad experience with solar contracts, right? Yeah. And we don't want the EVs industry to suffer that because They don't think it's reliable. They a lot of the companies are just happy about getting it in the ground, right? We all know that, right? That's a profit motive in America. We want to get the deal, but the best movement for the industry is making sure that the customers are happy, right? They have a good experience, as was indicated, and two, that people don't get into bad deals, right? Because a lot right now is going on. You'll hear some of the different companies say, oh, you're with that company, we can do a better deal, we can provide you better service, we'll take it out, we'll put it back in. Well, as you know in business, a bad story is told 7 times, a good story is usually only told once or twice. So I think if that's one thing I would strongly encourage everyone to spread that news as well as you're traveling around in the industry.
And I think actually to add to that, I think the market desires it. I think they definitely do. And I think presenting kind of clear and concise packages, like many other things you buy. I mean, we talk about service level agreements, telecommunications industry, you go get internet service for your business, it's very clear what the performance of that is. And so we need the same in this industry. We need clear packages. I mean, call it bronze, silver, gold if you have to, right? Like, let's make it as simple as possible, because I've seen a lot of hesitancy for business owners in particular on the private side, even getting into the space. They like the idea of putting chargers on their property, but they don't like the idea of getting into the gas station business. That's how they envision it. They're like, we are retail operators. We don't want to be gas station owners. So how can we avoid this? And they end up kind of stuck in the sand going, well, I don't know if I should just lease a plot of land and let somebody come in and to build it for me. I really kind of want to own this, but I don't want to maintain it. And so if we can solve that and we can give very clear kind of offerings of what that is, because different users have different uptime requirements. I mean, even I'm sure you see this in the fleet space. I mean, there's some customers that want the absolute uptime critical. There's other might be small business fleets, and they're like, well, yeah, we're 24-hour response time is fine. Like, I don't need minutes. And so if we had that offering and it was clear, then it makes it a lot easier purchasing decision for the industry. And I think as an education platform, we need, again, to educate that you should be signing up for something. There should be a service agreement involved. You shouldn't just plug it in and expect it to run forever and not have any program or anyone that's maintaining it, because your on-site guys, even if you have a crew, are not educated. They're not going to want to get involved in maintaining this equipment.
Yeah, I would add to that a little bit. So although this technology has been around for 10 years, it's still very much in its infancy, right? We're still at the beginnings. We haven't hit the hockey stick of growth. And what happens in any new technology is people get excited about the early phases: planning, site acquisition, deployment, engineering, turning the thing up. And then at some point in time, an operator owner has a network of EV chargers that they're responsible for, and the OEM has moved on to the next deal. The systems integrator has moved on to the next deal. The planners are gone, and the owner-operator is left with what we call day 2 management and operation of the network, of the ecosystem. So, and when you think, to Carl's point, what do you want your employees doing if you're in the building trucks business or you're delivering gas business? You want them focused on the things that your core competencies and the things that are important to your business. And that may or may not be operating an EV. So it's interesting. A year ago, when I came to shows like this, there wasn't anybody talking about day 2 operations and maintenance and how do we operate these things after everybody leaves because the network's been deployed. That's obviously what we're in the business of doing. But I did, walking around the show, start to see more of those people, more of those vendors. So the people here and the people out in the exhibit hall are there for you. So I think you're starting to see an ecosystem of people who are ready to pick up the pieces after everybody leaves and the deployment is done. Okay, we got a couple more minutes before we open it up to questions. This one I particularly picked for Camille and for Carl. So you talked a little bit about the outset, but I know you're passionate about data, right? And it's the data that comes from the machine. It's the cooperation with the OEMs, the manufacturers, both software and hardware, on how we need to get some level of standards or some level of transparency so that we know what's going on and we see error codes that are common across multiple platforms. So maybe you can touch on that some more.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing, a lot of folks use the Open Charge Point protocol. And one of the things that we saw early on was that while there were about 30 error codes that could be implemented in the software, most folks only chose like 10. And I often said, I was like, I just thought that and nothing would break. So so there is like this huge gap. But what I will say, leaning on the side of like hope, because I feel like my colleague here has been giving us a lot of hope, so I want to lean into hope, is that SAE has done a really good job of working with hardware manufacturers to start further developing out those error codes and then also making them actionable. Because what we were also seeing is that even the error codes that were implemented weren't actually actionable. Like there weren't actually any steps that could be taken from them. And so SAE, along with a lot of the hardware manufacturers, has been spending a lot of time on that. I think the part that is still missing, right, is a little bit of what I chatted about in the beginning, where how do we start identifying error codes when interoperability issues come up, right? So how do I know that this is a car problem and not a hardware problem, or even a payment system? Yeah, I feel like you mentioned credit card readers to some manufacturers and they'll scream, but like, how do I know this is a credit card reader problem and not the actual hardware problem? So there's still a lot of areas of opportunity. But what I will say, I'm entering in, I believe, my 8th year in this industry now. I have been very pleased with the level of collaboration that I've seen. We absolutely need more, but I do think there are new manufacturers coming into the space that's forcing people to get their little lives together, which has been very, very exciting. So while we do have a gap, I do see this level of iteration through competition that is happening.
Okay. Anyone else want to touch on data?
Yeah, I mean, I'll expand on that a little bit. I agree 100% with everything you just said. And I think that that's a huge, huge factor. And I've seen the same in the industry coming out of the energy services, kind of energy efficiency space. To see the collaboration in this industry has been a breath of fresh air. And just openness across what typically would be competitors talking and understanding data and trying to achieve the same results and the better good for all. And so I think that's really, really important here. And I think really the next iteration of understanding this data is being proactive. I think thus far we've responded very reactively. And that's where I mentioned earlier, I think artificial intelligence in particular plays a key role in this. There's an enormous amount of data. How do we ingest that data? And then how do we use this data to predict potential outcomes? And how do we prepare for that? And how do we stage, like Camille hit this earlier, and Dan mentioned, some of his facility offerings, but how do we stage equipment across the country? That's the only way we're reliable, is by staging physical goods that are needed to maintain that uptime. And how do we send that out where the response time can happen in a critical manner? And I think the only way I see doing that is understanding the predictive elements the best way possible. And taking data and making assumptions on what is going to happen. And AI is very, very good at that. As long as we agree as an industry to feed that data in and understand it. And once we understand it, then we start to see trends. And like Camille said too, there's a lot of finger pointing that right now. It's the hardware, it's the software, it's the vehicle. And we've found ourselves in that boat where then we're stuck in the middle trying to figure out, well, is it the software? Is it the hardware? They're both saying it's the other's problem. And that is a real problem in the industry right now. So how do we make a cohesive system where we're reading those error codes and we're really understanding what it is? And that's kind of back to the point of transparency. Where can we see that across the board?
I would just add to that. I think our office believes that the feds have to get more serious about it. Either the FTC or FCC needs to weigh in on this the way they've done any other kind of telecommunications or digital device. I think if they weigh in on this, I think we'll get there a lot faster. Right now, a lot of state governments are starting to pass laws and introducing laws around uptime, but this is really a federal issue, so you can have consistency across the country. I think that's where we really need to go.
Carl, you bring up I'm sorry, Jen,
Can I
go ahead.
just, sorry, I just want to pull on a couple of threads that do that. But the old slogan of data is king. Data is going to be king here. And it's around being able to have the intelligence to own and operate it, but also the intelligence to start driving the standards and even the protocols, right? And the capability that will really take the overall industry to a higher maturity level, I think is really also a key point that, I think that by having that data, not just the artificial intelligence, but the intelligence, the runway, the experience of starting to promote for those standards. What does that need to look like at the EV level? What does it need to look at the EVSC? But really also the protocols associated with that as well.
It brings up a good point in supply chain. So we think about supply chain issues around our deployments and how quickly we can get equipment in the field, but there's supply chains around critical sparing as well. even if your SLA is 24 hours, 48 hours, or best effort, if it takes 2 months to get a spare part, that's a problem, right? Any experiences around around getting spares for your customers so you can get things back up and running quickly?
The most interesting thing that we've seen is that when stations go out of warranty, and even when you're trying to source parts from, the original person that OEM got their part from, oftentimes people are specializing the parts. So even if you find the part, that OEM had already added something different to it that you can't send it to them to do anything. So I think we're going to enter into this space where the parts that are needed to fix the stations won't even, you cannot source them on your own, right? And so I think that is going to be something that we really do need to get a hand on, right? Because a lot of these parts warranties expire. And so how are we preparing, once again, those site hosts, the fleet operators for success if you can't directly source a part because it's been I'm missing the word. Someone's here more technical than me. Well, yeah, either retired or somebody added something special to that part, right? And that's something that we've come up against a lot, which is an interesting problem.
Well, in obsolescence of parts, right? It used to be that parts would in the network and they were available for, 10, sometimes 20 years. The way we manufacture now, they're available for 2, maybe, right? So that's a key part. Thank you for that. Anything else?
I think we're getting a little better at that. I agree,
Okay.
but I think particularly on the DC fast side, the modularity of platforms I think is very helpful in this, and I think it's a big need of being able to swap out power modules or be able to have multiple power modules in a unit, so it doesn't go fully down. It just charges at a lesser rate. I think those are really important. On the level 2 side, like Camille's saying as well, I think one of the things we're seeing is because of how these are manufactured, they're not really serviceable in many cases either. It's the option is we'll ship you a new unit, and the unit may be different, like she just said. And so now you have a cosmetic thing too, right? It's like, oh well, I have 9 that look like this, and I have 1 that now looks different, or has different interoperability problems or challenges because it's slightly different hardware, and I can't maintain it the same way. And so I think we're seeing an evolution in technology, and we're just in an industry that we're colliding a bunch of exponential technologies together. And so I think we're going to see this for many years to come. The good news is I feel we're at a point where things are starting to stabilize. I think the Wild West is starting to end, and we're starting to hit a little bit of stabilization, which I think is a really good thing in helping this become a maturing market. And I think all of us in the industry, I think that's part of what we're hoping for, is hit that maturity where everybody kind of plays by the same game.
One of the acronyms that you'll start to hear in this industry that we've heard in others is NTF, no trouble found. Because quite often, or technicians, I'm sure yours are not because they're fully trained, but technicians don't know how to fix something, so they just replace it, right? Or somebody's looking at it remotely, they can't fix it remotely, so they just replace it. They come back to the factory, there's nothing wrong with them. So you need to have a process for, we call it clean and screen, right? Test it. Does it work? Put it back in the depot. If it doesn't work, send it back to the OEM as an RMA. Or, if it's not that expensive and it's broken, scrap it, the way you're supposed to scrap it. So that's a good one. Okay. So this gets into kind of the theoretical, and we got to open it up for questions. But if there are folks in the audience who are deploying, they're the charge point owners, the owners or operators, and I suppose if you have, a charger or a set of chargers, maintaining it on your own is not all that difficult, especially if the maintenance is to flick the circuit breaker. But when you start to get a network of these things that are spread around a large geography, does the team have a feel for when you start to think about a third party to monitor and maintain and look after these things, to my earlier point, so your people can go focus on the strategy of the company? Any thoughts on that?
Well, the one thing I tell folks is that because the technology is new, just having field service technicians to go out on site it's not enough, right? Because oftentimes when the field service technician gets out on site, they have to call the NOC and sit on the phone with NOC and to troubleshoot with the NOC. And if that field service technician doesn't fully understand the ecosystem, then it's hard for them to be helpful. And so you're consistently rolling folks out. So one of the things that we have done, I'm like leaning in the side of hope. I'm really glad that you're on this panel with me. um, so one of the things that we have been able to do, there is a new certification program coming out from SAE. And so what SAE is going to be able to provide is being able to ensure that folks that are working on charging stations are being tested on how they understand the ecosystem. Because even if you are going out to cycle a breaker, if you're cycling a breaker on the same station 10 times within the year, there is actually probably something core happening to that station. If that field service technician isn't aware of that, it does a disservice to you, And so, we have this SAE program coming out, but I just would implore you, as you're looking for field service companies, make sure that they understand smart assets. Like, that's why leaning into telecom folks or folks that are working with platforms like Charger Help, because it is way more than just rolling a truck, specifically because this is new technology and the problems will change all of the time.
And the first priority is try not to roll a truck, right? So what you can do remotely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think a direct answer to your question, too, I think the time where a third party is necessary is, number one, if you're offering to the public. If you have a small business and you're just charging your employees, that's your choice. But if you're starting to charge to the public, help protect your own brand as part of it, too, by having a third party support you. I think number two on the fleet side is if you have a critical fleet, then you absolutely need somebody to help support you. I think there's very few organizations that have the in-house ability to be able to pull that off without third-party help. If it's critical to their business, then they need to be employing some type of third party. And that may change over time, but right now, today, I think a third party is critical.
Thanks, Carl. So before I open it up to questions,
I'd like
anything
to
else you wanna
add, maybe add to Carl's point. I absolutely agree with you, and it's a little bit at Camille's point. On a 360-degree solution, there's a whole ecosystem of tech and components, all the way from the panel, all the way to the charger and the EV itself. So, it's a very complex from an operational perspective, right? And being able to not only maintain it, but monitor it to ensure that uptime's there. And so you require certification. I really love that, by the way. The level of certification that's coming in. Even when we've talked with other and looked at partners to do support from a field service, the difficulty is that everyone has like one piece of it, right? They don't have that 360 degree of the ecosystem that you're really trying to monitor and maintain. So I would definitely advocate and support, what both of you have said there.
Thank you. More? Yeah. Yeah, let's parting thoughts.
Literally the last thing, in partnership with the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, in May, we're opening up a mobility workforce training center. And so we're actually going to have DC fast chargers there, level 2 chargers there. And we're starting in South LA where we're going to be training folks, but also allowing folks to come in to get trained on a new hardware. And so we are looking for new hardware partners. We have funding to actually pay for the station, so it's not like you have to donate them. But definitely looking for newer hardware. We already have kind of like the core folks, but if there's new hardware that would like to be at the center, please reach out to us.
Excellent. So let me open it up to questions. You got a great panel of experts. I think we have one right here.
This is Ganesh with Petro Canada. There is a uptime, but there is a cost to the uptime. So on a high level, let's say for a 97, 98, whatever uptime, let's take the 97, that's the favorite number. What is, let's say, cost per kilowatt hour delivered? 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents. What's a good cost look like? I mean, you can spend as much as you want and get that uptime, but is it worth it?
Yes, it's worth it.
Well, from a business point of view, what does that balance look like? What is a good balance between that uptime versus O&M cost?
Yeah, so I think when you're looking at maintaining your infrastructure, right? Sometimes it goes back to opportunity cost or cost lost, right? Why are you deploying your EV system? Are you providing your EV system to charge customers and make a profit? Are you using your EV system to take care of your tenants of your building, your home, your employees? And once you understand, first of all, what's the criticality of the EV charging system, and what's the expectations of your customers, then you really have no choice but to provide, I think, a quality service that either is going to protect your brand, is going to be available to your customers and your employees, And then it's looking at what is it going to cost me as an owner-operator to do this myself, which is people, sometimes 24/7, 365. Sometimes it's just business hours, depending on the criticality. And looking at what is it going to cost to do it yourself, and what is the opportunity cost of that cost? Could you be using those dollars somewhere else? If it's a light lift and you have a staff that can handle it, that's great. And I mean, that works just fine. But my point, I guess, from our perspective, is at some point you reach a certain scale, that becomes difficult, and that's not the best place to deploy your resources. But at the end of the day, to protect your brand, it has to be up. Right?
And to add to that real quick too, I think one of the elements that if you don't have a reliable asset, then you have a depreciating, non-functioning asset. Yeah. And that doesn't do you as a business owner. If you ran this great ROI and the system's not running, then your ROI calculation is completely off anyways. So you have to, it's critical that it's reliable. Otherwise, all your economics are out the window anyways.
Question in the back.
Thank you, everyone. I think you have all described what you guys are doing to keep uptime high, but you also all alluded to how fragmented the ecosystem is and the issues with data sharing and maybe lack of perceived ownership. In this fragmented ecosystem, how are you guys seeing the route forward so that you can provide feedback to the OEMs or other partners to improve the overall environment?
Yeah, for us, there's no better data set than what's actually happening in that station in that moment. And so we built out a field service app for field service technicians to basically insert data that we can then do analysis and then build models off of. And so that's how we're able to really sit on top of everything, right? Is that your field service folks are gonna have they are your eyes and ears of this entire infrastructure. So how are we ensuring that their data is not getting lost in email or a spreadsheet or wherever else that field service folks send their data through. And then ensuring that you're asking that field service tech the right questions and that it is picked up in a structured way. And so that's how we've gone about, being able to offer a level of stability within a fragmented space, because at least you're getting the true data that you cannot get from the cloud, and that it helps better inform how we should think about the data that we do get from the cloud.
I just wanted to add as well that we've received a lot of calls from charging companies because of the U.S. Department of Energy in many of the FOA applications in the fall, and also now with NEVI, they're encouraging, US DOT is also encouraging people to work with clean city organizations around the country. There are over 75 across the country. If you're not working with one, you really should. But when people contact our office, which we get a lot of calls from charging companies because everyone's calling, they got the newest technology that can save the world, it's very reliable, they're so good and all that. We talk to our peers. We also share with them some of the things that are of significant concern before we partner with them, try to advance their business growth in our area, especially the reliability, the breakdown, do they offer maintenance agreements, and also get references as well. So I think there are a number of things that you can do, but I think also many, as I stated earlier, state and local governments are not going to wait for the feds to act, right? They are hearing this from their constituents. I think it's only going to accelerate as more and more cars come on the market this year. This issue is going to intensify as people continue to get more and more EVs. So some of this is going to be regulatory, and some of this is going to be the survival of the fittest among these companies getting bought out. And bad news always travels faster than good news.
So to give you a little flavor, and I'll give you some insight on what we're doing. We're doing it at every stage, and it's a lot of active, open partner channel. So we do interoperability on that solution. We have a lab in our corporate headquarters city. We go test that solution and we are very methodical. We document, and then we actively go back to all of our ecosystem partners, and we go through what worked and what didn't, and do fixes. This is ahead of even starting day one. We're doing it again as the site is built out and that site is, everything's been energized. We do commissioning, we do another cycle. So we actually have the physical, actual assets, software, firmware, all the components, and then we're doing that actively with our channels. So that's all ahead still of day one. As we get to day one, what we think is very, to the fragmented piece, when you look at that 360, you've got angles from every realm. It's having one single pane of glass, having like an intelligence center, and building not only, you have to build some processes, that's the honest truth, right? When there's gaps there, understanding those gaps, knowing those gaps, building processes and people around that is part of what we're starting with. And the hopes there is to go back to our partners and be able to have new requirements and new capability and new protocols that helps elevate it, because it's a stair step, right, as you go.
Yeah, I would say just because there isn't data from the OEM doesn't mean there isn't data, right? There's data, and it's people like this panel and yourselves that are collecting that data, doing your own analytics, quite often software assisted, that's still providing good information, right? I know there's somebody in the back that's been patient. If we could get to him.
Okay, hi, thank you. Byron from Texas A&M University. And, you know, all of this, as far as monitoring, operating, and maintenance, that's money, right? So small business, big corporations, they're carrying this cost, but it's still relatively cheap to the end user. When do you see those end user prices starting to take care of some of these costs and have more parity with gas or what everyone else might be paying? Thank you.
Anyone?
I'll start with that. I think we're seeing some of that already, but I think ultimately if you're the operator, then you set the price. And if you think the price makes sense in your market based on demand, then you have control. Just as you see on the same corner gas stations, you see one across the street is 5 cents more than the one across the street. And the funny part is sometimes the one that's 5 cents more has more vehicles in it than the one across the street. So what are you doing to drive traffic to your stations? Are they safer? Are they more well lit? And so I think that's the question and what it is. But the economics, if you're the operator, then you have control over what that pricing is. And you just need to make sure that you're in line with demand. Because if you're not, then you're out of spectrum. But I think the other thing that we're going to see happen over time is we're going to see, just in the larger energy picture, I think we're going to see some shifts that change what the core base cost is for buying energy. And I think more long-term, as we see more renewable energy sources come online, I firmly believe we're actually going to end up with I know this is hard to believe today, but we're going to see a much lower cost during daytime, what are conventionally peak hours, and that's actually going to be more the optimal time to charge. Because when you start taking some of these fossil fuel resources off the grid, that's what's powering us at night. And so that will shift in the model too, and I think ultimately that'll affect pricing, where it'll actually make things like workplace charging more desirable than it is today, where 80+%, 90% charging takes place in the home.
We've got about 30 seconds. I haven't looked over here. Any questions over on this side?
I don't think he answered his question about how do you guys plan for the cost, right? So if you guys build it into your plan, percentage-wise per kilowatt, 10%, or if you guys are doing it by kilowatt, 5 cents per kilowatt of delivered, how do you guys build it in for a great sustainable system? What's the cost percentage that you guys are looking at for having good O&M?
Yeah, for us, we do a fixed monthly price per station that allows for unlimited truck rolls. And so what we do is we are taking on the risk of ensuring that uptime. Use the word ensuring very loosely, but that's how we're thinking about it today. It definitely isn't something you're about to make money off of. I think you have to be in the mindset of you're pushing towards mass EV adoption. I recently read how long it took for gasoline and gas stations to come about. It takes an investment for us to get there. So I don't think people are going to make money off of charging, maybe not in the next 5 years, right? But the idea is that you're doing the investment now for later.
Oh, I thought that was somebody in our session. And to Antoine's point earlier, it gets into your maintenance contracts and negotiating your maintenance contracts. I think you want to have a deterministic cost for maintenance. You don't want to pay per dispatch. You don't want to pay per outage, right? You want to have a contract with somebody that has a certain number of dispatches, it has a certain number of tickets, right? So that's deterministic and known, and it has to be built in. If you're charging customers for the charge, that needs to be embedded into the cost of the service, right? If it's not being charged for, then it's an operating cost that needs to be,
And can I
thought
just
through.
add one thing to that? For people that have fleets, I said this the other day. We work a lot with fleets. Their number one job is to making sure those vehicles are ready when they're time to go and that they get back there safely. So reliability is extremely important if you're trying to get fleet business. So definitely keep that in mind as well. And also make sure that you have in your agreement response times, right? Because for a fleet, they can't afford to have their workers sitting around for a couple hours, right? And so, as Carl indicated, that might be for maybe some general management people, but if they got to take a fire truck, a garbage truck, a delivery truck out, that truck's got to be ready. And then if they got hourly workers sitting around, they're going to be hopping mad. Thanks.
All right, I think that's it for our time. Appreciate it. I know we'll all be around for answer questions in the back if you have any for myself or the panel. Thank you. Thank you all.